Welcome back to You Must Be Woking with her, Dawn Hurst.
And him, Craig Richards. Today we're diving into our ever-popular woke news, where we're going to look at stories from news, politics and popular culture, giving our no-holds-barred opinions and exploring how these themes impact the workplace.
Yeah, we've got a packed episode today. We're talking about BBC series Riot Women, the female politician that was thrown out of the Northern Ireland Assembly, and the MOD's shocking bullying payouts that they've been spending lots of taxpayer cash on this year, and a few more stories as well to boot.
Fabulous. But before we jump in, haven't seen you forever. Let's have a quick catch up. What have you been up to?
It feels like forever, doesn't it? But it hasn't actually been that long. It's only been a few weeks, but it feels like I haven't seen you in centuries. But I think it's because we're both so busy and you've been flying around the world again. So you've been in different countries, different time zones and things. And I've been literally, I haven't been at home very much at all either the last few weeks. It's that time of the year for us though, isn't it? Where it gets really busy. Our clients are all doing kind of end of year wrap ups. They're wanting lots of our time in order to kind of help celebrate some of the great work they've done this year, but also wrap up some of the projects that we're doing this side of the Christmas break before we get into planning for next year. So yeah, I've been good. I've been busy, but yeah, all good. I've got my Christmas decks up. You can't see them, but I can see yours in the background. You're looking pretty festive.
Absolutely, it's got to be done. We celebrate Christmas in our house, and we're going for it big time.
I did put my Christmas outside lights up last week, and so I'm looking festive on the outside of the house. I've still got a little bit more to do with my decks and stuff, but I'm getting there in the festive spirit, and I've got a nice break this year as well, which would be good.
Nice. Yes, we've just got to avoid the flu. I'm hoping that I've had my doses, because normally it's day 3 of Christmas holiday, isn't it?
Yeah, I've done really well this year. I've managed to. I had it. You know, when you can feel it coming. Jacob was poorly. Then I was traveling so much, and everybody around me was just full up with the flu, and I was thinking, oh, I'm bound to get it. But I've held it off so far. And I just know what's going to happen. Like first day of leave now, I'll be like, oh, no, I've got it.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, not good. Well, I hope you don't.
I'll be fine. I'm sure. I'll get into the festive spirit. Nothing a mulled wine won't fix.
Oh, a bit of hot whiskey, you'll be champion. Oh, right, let's get into it. So I thought we'd start with something powerful. Have you been watching the new BBC series Riot Women?
I have, yeah. I've been absolutely loving it. It's really good. It's won awards and everything already, and it's only been out a few weeks, right? So it's already up there. I think it's really insightful. And we've talked a bit about menopause and stuff this year on the pod. So I felt like I was watching it as a more informed viewer too, right? Which was really helpful. Thanks to Ginge Unhinged.
Oh, yeah. We're going to talk about that in another episode.
Oh, brilliant.
Oh, no, it was really interesting, but there were so many layers to it, weren't there? Mental health, abuse, addiction, all of those things. But there was one scene that really, really did it for me that I'd like us to discuss. So can we just watch that now?
Yeah, let's do it. Wow. Wow. That was good. Made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end of it.
Absolutely, it did. Absolutely. So many things to unpack in there, isn't there?
Yeah.
So kick us off.
Oh, where to start, right? Where to start? So I think for me, this one is when I was watching it, I was wondering how many people would be watching this and believe it. Right. To believe that it was real or that this could happen in real life, because I genuinely think there's quite a lot of people out there that would watch that and think that's not real. They wouldn't behave that way. But the sad truth is you and I see that quite a lot, right? We see that in lots of organizations, and it is true. And even the response of the chief man was really true as well, right? So as with most things, Dawn, you know what I'm like with these kind of things. I like to ask myself the why, right? So why is this happening in the first place? And then the second bit is why, therefore, has it not been fixed? And when I was thinking about the why is it happening, I think the woman in the scene hit the nail on the head in some respects, which was um, the the guy that was doing it to the other woman um, was trying to make her feel small. It was about power for him, right? I think in that scene, and she talked
Mm,
about a bit of humor in that, but I'm not convinced he was searching for the humor. He tried to make it out like it was about humor, but it wasn't. I think for him, it was about power. But I was also thinking, actually, we need to be careful that we don't tar all men with the same brush here, right? Because I think other men may have behaved that way too, but I'm not convinced it would have been done for the same reasons. Neither,
mm,
and any reason is not a reason, right? It's not an excuse, but we have to think a bit deeper about why people might behave this way. And I think in that case, he was definitely doing it to make that woman feel small. It was about power for him, and he tried to hide that under the guise of humor. I do wonder whether some other men may have done it through humor, thinking, oh, it's acceptable, it's humor, it's funny, as opposed to it being through malice. And again, I'll repeat, neither of them are okay, but I do think the reasons why are slightly different. One of them you could fix with education, right? So you can help those
mm,
other men realize that it's not funny and it's not acceptable and you could move on. For those that were behaving because it was about power, that's a harder fix. And I'm not sure you can fix
mm,
that with education or anything else. So I think there's a bit of that. What I actually thought was more interesting was when the scene told us why it hasn't been fixed. That's the bit that
mm,
got me the most, right? Because actually, what we saw in that scene was a leader, a chief, or whatever he was in terms of status, telling us all the reasons why this can't be fixed overnight and why he wasn't able to fix it, right? And the bit for me was he talked very, very quickly about, oh, resources, I'm under pressure, I've got to get results, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So straight off the bat, he's thinking this could be disruptive and I can't, no one's going to give me the space to fix this stuff because they want results from policing, right? Rather than dealing this.
mm.
That's a real shame in there because what I saw on that guy's face was fear about what was happening. Then you layer that up with he probably doesn't know how to fix it either, right? He's probably worked all his career in a police force. He's had to navigate all of these things. And even if he knows it's wrong, he doesn't know how to fix it. He hasn't got a budget
Mm.
to fix it, right? He hasn't got air cover to fix it. That is systemic. That's a real systemic problem for leaders. And I think that scene told us more about why it's not being fixed and why these issues are existing and not being fixed than it does about why it happens. Right. And that for me was the bit that really got me.
Yeah, I think it's interesting the points you make, and I think what was interesting for me was that comment where he talked about this is someone else's problem, and I think that's so true too because it goes in the too difficult pile,
Yeah.
and for all the reasons you've just said, fear, budget, how, know-how, all of those things, but it goes in the too difficult, and therefore the focus is on other things. But I thought there was some really interesting dynamics in that around the need to survive in an environment like that. For example, to be an alpha female in that environment
Yeah.
and to almost mirror the behavior of your male colleagues. And I've seen that so often where the only people who can thrive are those who can withstand that
Yeah.
kind of behavior.
100% true. I believe I agree with everything you just said. Then I think that's what we see quite regularly, right? In these,
Mm.
and I don't want to say male-dominated environments because they're not anymore, right? And this is the problem, right? They're
No.
not male-dominated environments. And the point you made as well about this, we often just assume that this is about male versus female, but it isn't because we see it with apprentices, we see it with male on male, right? Banter, all of these kind of things. These
Mm.
are all different types of environments where that inappropriate behavior is clashing. And I think you're exactly right here. Therefore, people are pretending to be someone they're not or having to be somebody they're not in order to try and survive and get through. But his own survival, he talked about, right? So as the leader, he was saying, I'm nearly at pension age. I just want to get by so then
And
someone else
that's the
can
key
bloody
point,
deal with it,
isn't it?
right? I've got a few more years left
Yeah.
and then it's definitely someone else's issue. And I have a lot of
Like,
sympathy for that, right? Imagine trying to spend the
yeah,
last 5, 10 years of your career living like that, knowing that it's wrong, but knowing you can't do anything about it. Like,
yeah.
oh my God, that's so awful.
Yeah, absolutely that. And I think that generational point is a really key one in this too. You know, what we found acceptable, we've said this a million times 30 years ago, isn't acceptable today. And our 20, 30-year-old colleagues are not going to tolerate that.
No, and it's definitely a different environment here, and I think that there's something for me about the so what then, right? So if this is the case and these are the things we're seeing, how do we how do we fix it? I think to start with, I feel like we just need to stop and take a breath here, right? Because this is mirroring what's going on in the Met Police, right? That's the obvious
Mm,
link that they're trying to
mm,
make here, isn't it? Based in Yorkshire, but it's linking the problems that the Met Police have had published all over the papers for many, many years and months now. And I feel like we need to help leaders, politicians, leaders of institutions like the Met Police understand the process of culture change because they think
mm.
it's easy. Well, just deal with it, Mr. Inspector. Well, you can't deal with it, right? Because that dealing with it will cause disruption. So, unless you, the politicians, the public, are going to give them the space to make the actual change and the expertise to help them make that change, they can't just deal with it. So, just keep bashing them over the head and saying, deal with it is not the answer. We've got to pause, take a breath here, and help people understand that there is a process for changing culture in organizations that takes time, it takes money, and it takes expertise. So just bashing an inspector or a chief inspector over the head and saying get it sorted isn't going to get it sorted for all the reasons we've just articulated, right?
And I think you're right. And I think when people hear, you know, it's going to take a long time and it's culture and all of these things, it feels so big. So
Yeah.
it goes into the too difficult pile. You know, I had an experience last week where I was delivering to some leaders, very senior leaders, um, some behavioral type training, but we were particularly focused on sexual harassment. And I'd created some scenarios and some little videos and was showing them. And at the beginning, 40 or 50% were laughing at some of the videos because they
Mm.
found them funny. And they found them funny until I reminded them they were criminal behavior in their country. And I think, you know, we've got to go right back to basics here. Some people don't even understand what this means.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel a bit of sympathy for leaders,
Yeah,
right? Because yet again, like we're expecting things from people who don't know what they're doing, and that's no
no.
disrespect, because I'm sure they are very good at the job that they do, right? So they're very good at leading or very good at policing in this scenario. And we're using
Mm,
policing here because that's the clip that we've watched. But you could apply this to lots of other environments. And I'm sure they're very good at that, but they don't know how to change culture. Like, when were they?
no.
Culture is a trained skill, right? And
Mm,
you're expecting someone who's never had any training to do that and do it well. Like, it's ridiculous, really. You can't expect
mm.
that from people. So you therefore have to give them the tools, the resources, the budget, the space, and all of those things to either bring in the expertise or to do that change. And then I guess you also need to understand that takes time, and it's going to be quite disruptive while you go through that process in the first instance. But if you really want change, then put your money where your mouth is, back it up. If you just want to put a plaster on it, which is clearly what's being done for the last 10 years and so on and so forth, then you're going to continue to have these issues. And I just feel like these big institutions are on that track, and somebody needs to at some point to say, let's stop this hamster wheel for a second here and let everybody get off, and let's have a real conversation about what it's going to take to change this, because it isn't going to be done by Riot Women doing a lovely scene, right? It isn't going to, although that helps have the conversation, but it's not those that are going to make the change. It's going to be the leaders themselves. And if you're going to expect them to make those changes, you're going to have to support them through that, because they can't do it on their own.
No, I agree entirely. And I think even more basic than that, we need some honesty
Yeah.
because we always talk about that discovery phase, you know, the very beginning of what's the reality. And until people are prepared to be honest about what this really feels like, you can't remedy.
And just to end that bit on a bit of a positive note, right? The discovery bit is usually the most uncomfortable phase, right? So, well, I say
Absolutely.
discovery, and then the consequences of the discovery are
And then
usually,
embedding.
yeah, is usually the most difficult phase, because actually, when you then
Mm,
move and you turn the corner into cultural shift, and the shift you're trying to make from that to this, that can be quite exciting. It could be quite energizing for your organization. It can
yeah.
actually be a real positive phase for an organization. But you can't do that bit until you do the tough bit first. So you have to accept that the first bit is the hardest bit, but once you're off and running, it's a
Mhm.
lot easier. So, okay, well, I want to stay on this theme of sexism and misogyny and all of that kind of stuff, because I want to take us to the story of Nuala McAllister. I think I'm saying her name right. I hope I'm saying her name right.
Mhm.
From the Northern Ireland Assembly. Do you remember this clip? And we because this was the member of the parliament in Northern Ireland who'd got up to speak, and then she was ejected from the assembly after clashing with the deputy speaker. So let's have another look at that. Let's have another look at that clip now.
Just a second. That concludes the statement by the Minister. Point of order.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I don't need to be patronised. I just want to highlight that I asked the Minister a rather straightforward question.
Now, you have the opportunity to apologise for making that statement right now, because I believe that was directed at me. There's no patronising. I was waiting for the Minister to finish in accordance with what he's supposed to do. Would you care to make an apology, Member?
No. I learn from you. But Deputy Speaker, you need to take a look at
the member will retake her seat. Member, you have an opportunity to retract and make an apology for the statement you made, or you can remove yourself from the chamber.
Deputy Speaker. I won't make an apology, because you do need to look at the way that you do speak to many of the women in this chamber who do stand up, and the way you talk there. So I will not make an apology. And you can ask me again. My answer won't change.
Listen to the man. You are to remove yourself from the chamber right now. Thank you.
So what do you think? What's your thoughts? I watched this clip and I thought, I need to know what Dawn's going to say about this, because I just could imagine how you would have responded in that moment.
Well, I did watch it at the time, and I watched it again to prepare for this, and, to be called precious. And for me, it was the body language as much as the language. It was the deputy speaker ultimately. And that constant, I know the protocol is to take a seat, but how patronising. And I thought she was feisty, and but I thought that the reaction was so interesting, and it was for me just toe curling.
What would you have done in that scenario?
I would have done similar to what she said, but I think by being ejected, you missed an opportunity to actually make a further point. Now, I know subsequently there's been some further points made in the press, and of course that's helpful. But that doesn't level up the hierarchy, does it?
No. So I when I first watched it, I was quite angry. I was like, "Oh my God, I'm really angry about this," and mainly because of his reaction, right? Because he
Yeah.
literally went beetroot red. It was like a rage was erupting
His
inside him,
whole
right? He was like,
chest puffed out.
It was quite fascinating, his response to it, and I thought,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah.
And again, then afterwards, I softened a little bit, and then I started to have a little bit of sympathy for him. And I know I shouldn't, right? Because he shouldn't have behaved that way, and it was just rubbish. But actually, he is an individual, and I don't know the man, right? He may be a horrible person, I don't know. But let's assume for now that actually he's not a bad man, right? And what he was dealing with was something he had absolutely no experience of how to respond in the moment. He's operating in an organization which is institutional in the way it prioritizes tone, decorum, substance. Everything is kind of quite rigid about the way they operate. And he suddenly got all of these conflicting things in less than a 20-second moment and how to respond. And he's what I saw from him was this fight or flight, right? It came up in him, and then he
Yeah.
just fought, and he fought, and he landed on the side of institution and structure and the way we do things and all of that. And look, he came across really badly here. For him, I felt he came across quite badly. But the reason for that is because he just didn't know how else to respond. His brain didn't have another resource to go and tap into, and another resource to say, actually, there could have been a slightly different way to handle this, and whatever else. And that gave me a bit of cause for, well, I actually feel quite sorry for him now, and I don't, because I'm kind of balanced on it. I went both ways with it when I first watched it.
Yeah, I can understand that. And I guess that's my point about the final point, because there was an opportunity to do a little bit of non-patronizing education there.
Yeah.
And that is why I wouldn't have wanted to be ejected. So to support through how that could have been handled, I think would have had a real impact
Yeah.
in the chamber.
Sure. I think though, had it happened to you and had you been ejected, I like to think that I would have stood up and walked out with you. And I would have encouraged
Yeah,
my colleagues to do the same, because the point then would have been, actually, we're operating in an environment that's not fit for purpose anymore. And therefore,
yeah.
as a group, we need to force that change to happen. So I would have liked to think, had that happened to you, I would have stood up beside you and said, well, if she's going, I'm leaving too. And I would suggest all of my colleagues do the same, in order to make that point that actually we're trying to fix an old establishment traditional organization into a
Mm.
into a world that's not fit for purpose anymore. So I think there's a piece about that. So come on, what needs to happen here? What's the scenario for organizations? What can we do to try and tackle this?
So I actually had this experience myself in terms of working with a chairman it was a chairman who was very, very patronising and would take the same point from a male colleague, but wouldn't take it from myself. And um, I think there has to be an element of tolerance of that. They were of a particular generation where they weren't used to having female on the board. Um, uh, so I allowed that level of tolerance. But in terms of this behaviour, we've got to level this playing field up, and we've got to educate, and we've got to support individuals as to how they do things differently without embarrassing them and without being patronising back, but equally giving them the tools to be able to cope.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think this is only going to keep happening, right? That's
Mm,
my takeaway from this, and both this story and the last one that we just talked about. This will only keep happening because
mm,
the world we're operating today is different to the world we're used to operating, and you don't need to throw out all of your wonderful traditions in order to just make some tweaks and changes to be a slightly different world to operate in now.
mm,
But again, I come back to the fact that the people running these organizations or protecting these institutions don't have the knowledge or the expertise to navigate that shift and that change. And that for me is a bit of a
mm,
shame. So I guess, I'll never tire of saying this. Education is the way we get to the outcome. We have to educate people on the what, the how, the why, and all of these good things in order to make that a reality. But I just don't think we're going to see an end to these types of incidents or scenarios until we go through that process of education and a shift and change. And in order to do that, these leaders need help, because they can't do it on their own. So yeah, I totally agree with that one. Yeah. a tough one, isn't it?
Mm,
Because when I first watched it, I was angry with him, and then I had sympathy for him, and then I was angry for her, and then I had sympathy for her,
mm.
and I was having this real
Missed
mix of emotion,
opportunity.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and then I just came to the place that felt, now I'm just frustrated, and I want to go and fix it for them. I want to go and help them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Absolutely that. Exactly that.
Yeah.
Oh. So let's move on. So let's go from parliamentary sexism to military culture. There's a link. Um, Craig, this next story is shocking. The Ministry of Defence have spent over £5 million settling bullying, harassment, and discrimination claims in just the last 2 years.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know what to say, right? Because that same institution would say, "Oh, we haven't got a budget for culture change.
Mhm.
You got 5 million
Yeah.
quid to settle the culture claims that you've had against your organisation, but you haven't got a budget to do the change." Like, it's just toxic, isn't it? It's just utter toxic. If you're spending 5 million quid on settling claims, you've got a toxic culture problem.
You have, and when you read some of these, I mean, these are the claims where people have survived to make a claim. Clearly, there's some very, very difficult cases where people haven't. And, we come back to the basics of hierarchy. We come back to the basics of what are the core behaviours we should all be operating under, don't we?
Mm.
And, 5 million quid. Um, a tiny prevention budget, you know, 10% of that would have made such a significant difference as opposed to focusing on this.
Yeah, I agree. And there's clearly a pattern here, isn't there, from all the three stories we've talked about today already, um, all of which are public institutions or publicly
Mm,
funded organizations, all of which are under pressure for spending taxpayers' money, all of which are under pressure to try and modernize their institutions or their organizations in a world that they don't perhaps understand or don't know how to do those shifts. All the leaders who I'm sure are very qualified in their own fields, but don't know how to respond to these challenges. And
mm,
uh, I feel like this is the one point at which the state should intervene here. And
mm,
the state has a role to play, and I would argue they're doing some of that. So in the UK, for example, all of these institutions we're talking about today, by the way, are in the UK. But um, what we've seen is the introduction of things like the sexual harassment changes to the Equality Act and things in the UK. But what I would say on those shifts are, they're now putting some of the onus back on the employer or the organization to protect from, as opposed to respond to, which is great. It's a shift in the right direction. But again, it's just okay, but how? How do we do that? They're not helping them understand the how. And so you've got leaders running these big institutions, these big organizations, which inevitably, because they're in the public sector, they get more scrutiny, they get more, press coverage than perhaps a private sector company. But they don't know how to make these changes. They don't know what they're doing. And in the case of the police officer in the first story we talked about, who's clinging on for dear life until retirement and then hoping it'll be somebody
mm,
else's problem, you could probably replicate that in the
mm,
parliamentary institution. And again, in this Ministry of Defence example, you've probably got career military personnel running that organization who don't know how to make the changes. They don't know what needs doing or how to do it because they're not experts in this field. And I just think at some point the state's going to have to intervene here and say, here are some things you should do, you have to do if you're running these organizations in order to kind of make sure that they're fit for purpose in the time that we're living.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, bringing it right back to basics, we can't just promote subject matter experts. And you could apply that to any sector. These people are ardent professionals, but they've never been taught about people. and behaviour, and what is and isn't acceptable. And and I know you do too, in our culture work, we spend so much time unpicking the subject matter experts.
Yeah, and again, but we've talked about this in a previous episode, so I don't want to rehash back to it too much. But there's, we talk about that leadership ladder, right? So people end up in a leadership position because they're good at this profession, but they've never had the training to be good at that profession, right? Which is the leadership profession, and we should be, ensuring that our leadership programs and development programs are there and articulated to career pathways so that people can progress through the leadership ladder, so they know how to operate as a leader in a world that we're operating in today. And instead of having leadership training 25 years ago, like, that's not good enough anymore. The world has changed, the world continuously changes, and therefore we've got to help keep these leaders on a continuous professional development pathway for what leadership looks like in 2025. And we've got to help them be good leaders and to lead these organizations. They don't need the expertise, but we've got to give them the budget to buy in.
I agree entirely, and there's two elements to that, isn't it? The first is they don't know what to do. So should they be required to use a specific culture audit or a behavioural audit or something, and be publicly accountable for that for each of the facilities? And also, what does good look like when you're describing that? What are we aiming for in 2026?
Yeah,
What
and
does it mean?
I think that look, I have a bit of sympathy for that position. The problem, I think, with a culture audit is, how do you audit a culture to be a one size fits all? You can't, right? You can't do that because every culture is different. And therefore, by saying if you pass this audit, you're essentially trying to create things the same. And there's too much nuance in a culture for an organization to say, oh, I've ticked a box. There you go. There's my culture audit. I like the idea of
Mm.
the kind of presenting the facts to the public, because it makes people accountable and all of that kind of stuff. So it's an intervention which might force conversations or force some action. So I
Mm.
understand the reasoning for wanting to do it. But the risk you have with that is you're forcing every organization to tick boxes. So it's more about accreditation as opposed to assurance. And
Mm.
that's the bit that makes me nervous, because you and I are very, very focused on assurance over accreditation, right? So you don't need a badge. What you need is assurance that your organization is operating properly and you're doing the right things that are going to have the right impact. And my worry about
Exactly.
these kind of public audit things is they push for accreditation rather than assurance. And so, yes,
Yeah.
I like the idea of some kind of badge, but I'm not convinced it's the answer, I guess, is the point I'm making. And so what we need to do is probably a multitude of interventions to try and shift the dial in this
Mm.
space. And one of them might be around publicly declaring where we are, maybe around our engagement scores, I don't know. But then the other is about training leaders adequately to operate. If you're a leader in a public sector organization in 2025, you need to meet certain leadership standards and therefore you need the training to meet those standards. I think maybe that's a better solution. So we create a
Mm.
program for leaders to be able to say, I'm now accredited to lead at this level in this day and age. Maybe that's the solution. Um, and then there's the on the ground stuff, right? So how much work do we have to do and put into our organization to change some of the institutional or policy procedural stuff that has existed for hundreds of years to make them accessible to the talent that operates in 2025, right? Because I think that's also part of the problem. It's not just a people thing, it's a systems thing. And you don't need to throw the baby out with the proverbial bathwater here, but you do need to be able to review those systems and policies and processes and stress test them against the time of day, which is where we are in this
Mm.
modern day. So I think there's a bit of a mix for me on all of that.
Love that.
Okay, I want to just shift the gears. We are going to talk a little bit about the police again, but I want to talk a bit more about policy this time rather than the kind of people bit. So it was almost a seamless link from our last conversation around policy and procedural shift. Because this next story was reported first in October. The Met Police have announced that they are no longer going to investigate crime hate incidents. What's your thought on this, Dawn? This has been quite a big topic that's hit the media in the last
Mm.
few months here in the UK in particular. But I wanted to get your take on this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's highly emotive right now, isn't it? Particularly with the situation. And again, I appreciate we're recording globally, but within the UK, we've got quite a tinderbox in terms of hate incidents. And I think the reality is I get the resource challenge, which seems to be prevalent, of course, across the whole public sector. But I think this is where we've got to lean into some independent support, because if we bring this back to how we'd handle speak up or hate crime, if you like, within a corporate environment, often there's the opportunity for an independent or indeed a charity or indeed some external experts to support with that. And I think if these hate incidents go unmanaged entirely, we're allowing that to breed into microcultures within the country.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think in a workplace setting, um, it's slightly different to a societal environment, but there are
Mm.
similarities and there's things you can play across both. And I think for me, I'll talk about the society bit in a second, but in a workplace environment, this is where you and I often talk about that you need to lean back on your values here, right? So if your organization has a set of values and a set of ways of working or guiding principles, however you want to describe them in your organization, this is where they become real for you, right? Because
Mm.
it
Mm.
might be the small things like microaggressions, or it might be the small things like, excluding people, or it's not big stuff usually in an organizational setting. It's usually much more subtle. But as leaders or as HR professionals or D&I professionals in a workplace setting, this is the point of when you need those values and you lean back on those values, because essentially what you're saying to people is, it doesn't matter whether this is a crime. It doesn't matter whether it's accepted in society. This is what's acceptable here. This is how
Mm.
we
Mm.
operate. This is what is important to us. These are our values. And if you can't live and work by abiding by those values, then maybe this is not the right organization for you, right? And
Yeah.
and you give people that choice. And if they choose to stay and continue to behave, then you should discipline them based on those values too, right? Because those values, if they're real, and are being used in the right way, that's what they're for. They should be protecting you as an organization to manage that type of behavior and that kind of stuff that you're uncomfortable with. And if your values are, then we can do all of these things, well, then at least you're being authentic, right? I might not agree with you. I probably wouldn't want to work in your organization, but at least you're being authentic. But if you've got a value on the wall that says we're inclusive or that we treat everybody well, and that behavior is happening in your organization, then your values don't really mean very much, do they? And therefore, they might as well not be on the wall.
Exactly that. Exactly that. And it comes back to those.
Yeah. So I want to just take us back to the kind of macro environment here. And I'm going to apologize in advance here because I'm going to use language that some people might be offended by. And that's your right. You're entitled to be offended, but I'm going to use it. So if you don't like language, you might want to skip on a couple of minutes in this podcast. But I want to bring us back to this story about hate crime, right? And the Met Police not going to be investigating those incidents anymore. And I'm going to say good, right? About bloody time, because I think what's happened is, and we talk about this a little bit in the book, but maybe not to this extent, the pendulum has swung too far, right here.
Mm.
And we've confused um, free speech and hate speech. And what we've ended up
Mm.
doing is investigating offensive tweets or offensive speech as opposed to hate speech, right? And the key distinction difference for me, and there'll be a different descriptor for these, but the key differentiator for me is Hate speech is something that incites violence against others, right? So if you're inciting people to hate on other people or to cause violence to other people, that's hate. That's a hate crime. That's hate speech. If I choose to offend you through my speech, that's not a crime, right? We live in a free speech society. I can be offensive. I can choose to offend you. You might think I'm a dick as a result of that. And therefore, your choice is to cut me out of your life, right? Delete me from the WhatsApp group or delete yourself from the WhatsApp group, right? We live in a society where you're free to offend, I'm free to offend, and I'm also free to say, fuck off and stay out of my group and cut you out of my life, right? Because that's what a free speech society looks like. What we're not okay to do is to rally everybody else to hate on you or incite violence against you because you're offensive or because you believe in something that I don't. That's the key differentiator here. And what was happening was the police were investigating speech issues as opposed to real hate crime issues, which incite violence and things against people. And that pendulum swung too far. Not only last week, Piers Morgan was on an interview. I don't know whether you've seen this. It's been over the press this weekend, so it may be a bit recent. But Piers Morgan was being interviewed by Tucker Carlson from the US. And Tucker Carlson had told him about this they were having a row about free speech, and Tucker Carlson was saying, you don't have free speech in the UK anymore. And Piers Morgan was saying, don't be so ridiculous. Of course we do. And he used this example of a woman that had called, and this is where I'm going to use inappropriate language here, so apologies again, and another trigger warning for you. A woman had called her gay colleague a faggot on WhatsApp group, right? He then reported her to the police. While she was having a bath, 12 police officers came into her home and arrested her for calling someone a faggot on a private text message group. And then people wonder why the Met Police are now saying, we've got to stop this and we're not doing this anymore, right? Because that's that pendulum that has swung way too far the other way. It is utterly ridiculous. She's entitled to use language like that, right? She's entitled. I don't agree with it, but she's entitled to use it. I wouldn't have been overly offended by it because I've got a fairly thick skin and that language doesn't bother me. But other people might, and it's their choice to be offended. And if they're that offended, they can delete you from the WhatsApp group or they can leave, right? They can go somewhere else. You can't have a society where we've got police officers not willing to investigate and stop shoplifting, but they're willing to turn up to a woman's house while she's having a bath and arrest her for calling someone a name on a WhatsApp group. Like, our society is wonky when that is happening. And so I'm quite pleased that this policy has come out from the Met Police. And I hope it brings a sense of stability back to the difference between the two. Now, my worry here is that pendulum swings too far back the other way. And then when we have hate speech, which is inciting violence against individuals or marginalized communities, police won't investigate that for fear of it being the other way. And this is the problem when we do this. We push the pendulum too far and then it swings back too far and we lose the progress. And I'm really hopeful that the Met Police in this instance don't let that pendulum swing too far back the other way, that they don't investigate what I would consider hate speech, which is inciting violence against minority groups or others. And while we're on the subject, we're about to get to Christmas and the fairy tale of New York Pogue song is about to come back again. And yet again, we'll be having the same argument about whether they should change the words from faggot in the song. And for what it's worth, I like the word with the word faggot in it. So I will be using the original song.
I think we should do a little duet at our Christmas party then, just to make the point. I've always fancied myself as a bit of Kirsty McCall.
Oh, well, there you go. And if people get offended, they can choose to walk out of our Christmas party, right? They don't need to call the police. Sorry, I feel like I had a bit of a rant about that one, but it just winds me up when we're in here, because actually, when there is crime then against those marginalized communities where people are inciting violence against them, that's the difference, right? That's the stuff the police should be looking at and dealing with, not this nonsense about tweets and it just winds me up.
Yeah, absolutely. And 12 officers in your bathroom. Well, yeah.
That's a whole different podcast, Dawn, right? That's one for a glass of wine, I reckon.
La la.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's change the mood for a second into a slightly different policy innovation, because I want to talk about something that's making the rounds again. It's not a new topic, actually. It first landed in 2021, and it's in Portugal. They passed a law making it illegal for bosses to contact employees after work hours, and it kicked in on New Year's Day 2022. But the news article that was really interesting was, what can the UK learn from Portugal's right to disconnect? So there were some really key points in here in terms of having rights to switch off. However, there is a loophole, which is unless it's an emergency. The opportunity to totally disconnect, fines of up to €8,500 per breach, and also includes being disturbed on your holiday or annual leave, and allowing you to refuse extra work at weekends, and there will be no discrimination or change of behaviour towards those workers who abide by that.
Mhm.
So, Craig, what do you think? Is this going to work in our business and in the UK?
What do I think? So I kind of, I'm a bit, well, look, I'm going to just come out. I'm not a fan, right? I don't think this is a policy that should have ever come into effect in the country. And not because I don't want people to be protected from those kind of things, but actually this is one where, like, what the hell is the state getting involved in this for, right? Well, this is not a role for the state to play here. This is a role for companies and organizations, leaders to be dictating this kind of stuff, right? If you've got a problem where your workers are being contacted out of hours constantly, or having holidays disrupted, then you've got bigger problems than an £8,000 fine from the state, right? You've got massive issues around, work and time allocation and God knows whatever else, right? So I'm just not sure there's a role here for the state to play, and I'm not sure why the state's getting involved in this. Your talent, if they're feeling that way, will leave you and they will go elsewhere, or they will sue you for behaving inappropriately as a bad employer, and therefore you'll get taken to court. Like, why does the state need to get involved in this? The organization should deal with it and tackle it itself. If you've got a problem in your organization with this kind of stuff, there are ways and means to fix it. So we are a consulting house, right? We operate across many different organizations. We travel a lot. It's a very different environment for our team to work in than a 9 to 5 office job, right? So therefore, it takes a certain person to work in a consulting environment. We have to just be honest about that. And we are honest about that when we're recruiting people, right? So we tell them that up front. But it does mean that occasionally you and I are sending our emails out of hours and all of that kind of stuff. But we solve that by having a little sign on our email saying, just because you had an email from me at 2 a.m. doesn't mean I'm expecting a response from you at 2 a.m., right? Just because I'm texting you when I'm on the other side of the world and our time zones are different doesn't mean you have to respond in those time zones. There are other things that technology can help you with, right? So on Outlook now, you can say, delay all my emails until the working hour clicks in, right? So I might send a load of emails at 2 a.m., but they don't actually get delivered until 9 a.m. when, there's lots of things that can help organizations here. I'm just not sure this is something the state needs to get involved in, and they should just get back to doing what the state should be doing and not doing this stuff is where I'm at. Like, fix those cultural things we talked about earlier, right? Why are you dealing with this? Like, this is nonsense.
Yeah, I do. There's some sentiments in here, like you say, aren't there? If you've got fundamental processes in place, it shouldn't even be an issue, let alone need a solution. But it is the discipline of abiding by those two, though, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. But I think the other bit that worries me about this is, with the state getting involved, right, it becomes a kind of blanket, no one can do X, Y, and Z. And there are consequences to that, right? So you lose productivity, you lose innovation, you slowly chipping away at creativity within an organization. You and I
Mm.
often have our best ideas at 2 a.m. in the morning when we're
Mm.
traveling, right? And
In
so
the shower.
we just write a quick email and go, oh, we
Mm.
need to talk about this when we get back together, and we send it. If we're having to think every time we do that, oh God, we're going to be breaking the law because we're like,
Mm.
I just don't think it's helpful. There are too many consequences for that. Whereas actually, if you create an environment where your team feel like they can speak up, if they're feeling that way, they should be able to say to you, can you do me a favor and stop sending me emails outside of hours or whatever? Like, it's really starting to impact me. And you can go,
Mm.
oh, geez, I'm really sorry. I didn't realize that was the situation. And let's fix that, right? Let's find a solution, a workaround, the delayed emails thing or whatever, right? But
Mm.
yeah, I
Mm.
don't know. It just feels to me like there's too much risk that comes with it than the benefit of the state
Yeah.
getting involved here. All right, well, let's stay on.
Interesting one.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, but let's stay on the whole country thing, right? Because in
Mm.
Canada, there was a story recently um, about another cultural thing, but Canada Air, so the national airline and their national rail service, has now started using cultural, what do we call it? Sorry, cultural acknowledgements for land.
Yes. Mm.
So on a flight on Air Canada now, for example, you'll see a little sign that says, um, you know, Air Canada acknowledges the land we're overflying was Indigenous land or whatever it was, right?
Mm.
And there's been a huge hoo-ha in the press in Canada about whether or not the Air Canada and the in-rail service out there has gone too woke and they've gone mad because of all of this kind of stuff. So what's your thoughts on this one?
I'm perhaps a bit too black and white for this one. So I looked at it through my cultural appreciation or cultural appropriation lens,
Hmm.
which you've heard me talk about a lot before. And, you know, there's an element of respect in this in terms of, as you quite rightly say, we're recognising First Nations or we're recognising we're passing through Inuit territories, for example. But is that superficial? Is that actually going to get to the core of the issue, which is the mistreatment of lands and people within that culture? And what the travellers are actually saying, the people using the service, is that they're doing a bit of eye rolling. And therefore, it's actually pushing backwards the respect, not pushing it forwards.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you on that. When I was looking at it, I first read the story and thought, are we really having this conversation again? Because it's
Mm.
just that performative woke stuff, right? That we
Mm.
criticize quite
Mm.
heavily. So I thought, actually, I'm going to check, right? I'm not just going to take that stance because there were lots of tweets and messages talking about all the pros and cons of this kind of stuff. But I thought, I'm going to check, right? Is it just performative stuff or is there some substance to it? So I went on both of their websites. I went on Air Canada website, couldn't find
Mm.
anything on the website for Air Canada that talks about the reasons for it. What I did find was an earlier article, a news story about them having to change their policy on sacred items in the cabin because an Indigenous leader's headdress went missing on a flight. So they had to change
Mm.
policy, right? But other than that, couldn't find any mention of it. Then I went over to Via Rail's website, and they did talk about working with Indigenous communities to help them access employment through skills and stuff like that. So a little bit more substance um, than Air Canada. What I found more frustrating about this story was that both companies refused or declined to comment on the story that went in the press.
Yes,
And I thought, why are you doing this then? what's what's
exactly.
the point of you doing this performative gesture on your flights or on your rail services if you're not willing to stand behind why, right? And you're not willing to tell the story of why you're doing it. Because if there's some real reason, and let's take for argument's sake here, let's take the Via Rail one. We're working with Indigenous communities. We're going to try and make a difference and get them into skills, employment, all of that kind of stuff. well, then say that, right? We're doing it to acknowledge Indigenous
Absolutely.
communities, and we're also, to back
But
that up, we're doing this work.
But you've got to ask yourself, it comes back to the basics, doesn't it? I mean, WestJet are doing something similar, and they have said a little bit more about it, but nobody's saying a great deal because they don't understand, because it's been a performative intervention. There's been no genuine understanding or education or awareness within the organisations. And I bet if you asked 100 of their teams why, they couldn't answer you.
Yeah. And therein lies the problem. So for those of you listening, if you're a leader or a D&I professional or whatever, don't do this performative stuff unless you're willing to explain it, educate people on it, and back it up when you're challenged on it, right? Because if you can't do those things, you shouldn't have bloody did it in the first place, mate.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'm conscious of time, so we've got a couple of other ones to just
Two
to
quick
finish off
ones.
with. Yeah, a couple of quick ones because they're and they're a bit lighthearted as well. So let's start with the new Disney thing. Have you seen this, Dawn? This is the Disney's Versa short film Versa, and it's called our team have called this the Backlash.
Disgusting.
Brilliant, right? It's a bit tongue in cheek, but there's been a big backlash against Disney for their latest film because it's being accused of disgusting heterosexual breeding propaganda, which I thought was highly hilarious. That it's a story of a man and woman or two male and female characters going on a journey of life, love, and grief, and it's a short film. But the backlash online has been what I can only describe as quite hilarious for me. We've seen lots of people creating memes, playing back all of the anti-woke arguments that people on that side of the debate have been spouting about LGBT representation in Disney's movies and stuff, right back at them about heteronormative behavior. What was your thoughts?
And I don't think we should overthink this. It's created discussion, it's created debate, and it's given the 50-50 view. And I love it. I think it's genius.
Yeah, it's been really cleverly done. What I thought was really interesting, right? Because you know what I'm like with this stuff. I end up overthinking it and digging a bit deeper. But it made me think about there's a bit of a backlash against Netflix at the moment as well. Have you heard about this? Where due to their LGBT content being put into kids' movies and representation and stuff being put into kids' movies, and I thought it was really fascinating that people like Elon Musk, for example, the bastion of free speech that he is, he's now encouraging his followers, his millions of followers, to abandon their Netflix subscriptions because Netflix are having content with LGBT representation in it. And that just made me laugh, right? So free speech is okay, Elon, as long as it's your free speech and the one that you agree with, right? But anything that you disagree with, that's got to be banned and everyone should boycott it, right? The sheer arrogance and hypocrisy, it beggars belief, doesn't it, in this scenario?
Yeah.
Anyway, this Versa movie, the backlash, may it long continue because I've enjoyed it thoroughly watching everybody squirm as they go through it. It's been quite hilarious.
Yeah, love that one.
Cool. My dog's
so
off again.
The last story is a really positive one, isn't it? It features this viral Instagram post from Krishnal Strauss, who explained her version of how pronouns work and their importance to those of people who choose to use them. It was a great explanation, but let's have a look at the video.
I see it got into like a sex and gender conversation, and I know that pronouns have been a thing. Okay, so here's where some of you are going to scroll, but to the people that actually may not have somebody else to talk to or explain it to you, here we go. So when I was growing up, my first name is Tarina. And when I went to college, I decided I wanted to go by Chriselle. My first name, I just really attached it to kind of a negative experience growing up and my childhood and things that I wanted to get to flee away from. And I didn't want to identify with this dark time. And so I started going by Chriselle. But you can imagine that a lot of people that had known me my whole life it was very hard for them to switch to calling me Chriselle. And it took years. And it would be one of those things where, you know, if somebody calls me Tarina, I get it. I didn't ever get upset. But it would mean so much to me if somebody, like my family, for instance, would slowly try to correct themselves over the course of time. And I had one sister that specifically would, for me, correct people. And it was nice because, you know, you don't want to be that person. And sometimes I find I do that for G, because with pronouns, sometimes, you know, it's really gender expression is different from sex, which refers to organs you were born with. And gender is more of, you know, how you want to express yourself through, you know, just gender norms that we learn about since the time we're born. Pink is girls and blue is boys, you know, and not everybody feels, you know, that relates to that. And my partner, for instance, kind of feels more in the middle of both of those things. So it makes them feel comfortable to, you know, identify with their pronouns being they, them. So imagine if the UPS driver came and you don't know if it was a guy or a girl who dropped off the package. You'd be like, oh yeah, they came already. Because this is just something that we naturally do. I think it just gets a little politicized, and it doesn't need to be. It really is just meeting someone, what makes them feel comfortable. To me, it makes sense. Like G prefers to use they, them pronouns. I prefer to go by my middle name. It's as simple as that. If I met you and I had read your name was Samantha, but when I met you, you said, oh, actually, I prefer to go by Sam. Imagine I was like, no, I'm calling you Samantha. You're Samantha. You were born Samantha. I'm calling you Samantha. Like, I would never do that. I would be like, oh, okay. And say, for instance, because I already saw it written that way, I forget a couple times and I accidentally say Samantha, you know, either, you know, whether they correct me or not, I correct myself. It's more about your intention of wanting to respect other people and meet them where they are. And I appreciate if you made it this far. I hope you do feel welcome to stay. If you're not part of the community and you're an ally, we love our allies. And maybe you are confused by some things, and I hope this cleared some of it up. And to the people out there that always try and defend me, I love you.
Ah, it was cute.
It was. It
Yeah.
was cute. I found this, I have to say, and pronouns, as you've heard me talk about before, is a topic that I have a pretty strong view on. But I thought this was great because it turned it into a human relatable story. And I loved the change of name example as part of the pronoun piece. And I could really relate to that. And the allowing people to use whatever identity they wish explained pronouns for me, having worked in this space for 3 million years, in a much more palatable way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I thought it was a lovely way to end the pod as well, right? Because we often talk about the power of storytelling, right? And reason we set this pod up, the reason we wrote our book, is so that we could shine a light on what are really important topics, but in a way that tells stories about them, right? And allows us to share some of our experiences, some of our knowledge, and actually tries to take a bit of the heat out of some often contentious topics or things that we disagree with, you know, those kind of things. And I just thought it was really well done, this video, in the sense that it was a powerful story and it was just personal. And often it's that stuff that makes the difference here, right? Because, you know, I don't believe people wake up in the morning and want to be horrible to other people. Or if they do, there's a very small percentage in society that behaves that way. The vast majority of society just wants everyone to get along and just be nice to each other, right? And this story just brings a bit of a human element to what is a really shitty topic right now, right? For many people who are exploring their identity or transitioning to a different gender, you know, this is a really contentious topic for people right now. And I just thought Chriselle done it in such a lovely, nice storytelling way that just gave it a real human element. And I thought, wow, good for you. I really liked it.
Yeah, loved it.
Okay, well, that's it for another episode of Woke News in the bag, Dawn. I always love these ones. They're always good to just look at cultural topics, isn't it? Rather than just the workplace stuff. Because there's always a link back to the workplace.
Absolutely. Big thank you to everybody for listening. We hope you've enjoyed the latest episode of Woke News. And as always, our unfiltered opinions.
Absolutely. Anyway, bye from me.
And bye from me.